I'm Angela Morabito with Campus Reform, and you're watching 5 Big Questions. Today, I'm joined by Professor Todd Zywicki from George Mason University's Antonin Scalia School of Law. Professor Zywicki has long fought for individual rights on college campuses, and most recently, he successfully challenged GMU's vaccine mandate. Professor Zywicki, thank you for being here.
It's great to be with you.
Well, thank you. So let's set the scene here. George Mason University announces in June that faculty members who don't get the shot won't be eligible for raises. How did you react to this?
Well, at first I was appalled, most obviously, but then what the most important thing to me was I was familiar with the science and I knew I had had COVID. And I knew that from day one, they'd been telling us that if you've had COVID and recovered, that you have immunity to being reinfected, substantial immunity. And so when I heard about this, I first reached out to the bureaucrats at the university who were designing the policy, and I said, "Are you guys going to recognize natural immunity?" This is very early on in this process of these vaccine mandates. Not a lot of places have done it, and they wrote back some disingenuous, dishonest email about cherry picking some data. And I said, well, it's pretty clear I'm not getting anywhere with these people. And these are just, sort of your typical university bureaucrats who just kind of follow orders, right? And just like don't have really brains or consciences. So I said, well, obviously I'm not going to listen. So the next time I better contact them with a little bit more behind me. So I reached out to the New Civil Liberties Alliance. We got affidavits from leading public health experts, Jay Bhattacharya from Stanford and Martin Kulldorff from Harvard, as well as my personal immunologist, Human Norchasm, who is a PhD in immunology and is taught at Harvard, Brigham and Women's Hospital, as well as Penn Medical School, and said, here's the evidence on natural immunity. Here's the evidence on Zywicki's current level of immunity. Here's why it would be dangerous to him to actually get the shot. George Mason never even responded to me. We contacted them privately. Instead, they just issued their mandate the next week. At which point, then we had no alternative but to sue. And once we sued, eventually, we ended up. They recognized They recognized my request for medical exemption. Also, in part because I have an elevated risk of severe adverse reactions, which fortunately, I'm grateful they actually did recognize me with a medical exemption. They're still going to treat me differently for being unvaccinated, but eventually then they ended up getting rid of most of the privileges that they had given the vaccinated people, like not having to wear masks and that sort of thing. So at that point, I basically dropped this suit. But one of the things I was hoping would be that it would be a template that could be used for future suits. And that's one of the things that has happened, which is a lot of people have picked up on the arguments we've made. Policymakers have picked up on the arguments we made in the lawsuit to push for the importance of recognizing natural immunity and the danger to those who have natural immunity of being vaccinated against their will.
So when you mentioned that the school is still treating you differently, I understand there are still, quite a few requirements that you have to comply with in order to teach at the university and still remain unvaccinated. Are you comfortable sharing what some of those requirements are like?
Yeah, so a lot of the rules are just the same dumb rules that you have everywhere else, right? Wearing a mask. So vaxxed and unvaxxed both have to wear a mask. Social distancing, I guess. They've got the only real difference at this point, and it's stupid because it's obvious natural immunity has more protection at this point than vaccine immunity, but I have to be tested every week. And it's not an invasive test, but I have to be tested every week, and vaccinated employees have to only be randomly tested, I think 2 or 3 times during the semester. So it's inconvenient, but obviously I've not tested positive because I have natural immunity. And the irony of all this is that I first looked into the antibodies in July 2020 last year, which is I was one of the first people in America, I think, who got COVID in March 2020. And there were not tests available at the time, if you may recall, but I was pretty sure I had it. So before I went back and taught in July 2020, I wanted to teach in person. I felt like I owed it to my students to teach in person. So I went and got an antibodies test. My antibodies came back positive. I was like, oh, great. I've got natural immunity. I don't have anything to worry about. So I taught in person while a bunch of, younger colleagues, I'm in my 50s, a bunch of younger colleagues around campus basically took the year off and went to their beach house and Zoomed in all their classes, where I was here and I taught in person all year because I knew I had natural immunity. It's I put my money where my mouth was. It's like I know natural immunity works. I have natural immunity. I'm doing my job the best of my ability to my students. And so what they were basically trying to do was handicap me from doing my job for my students for completely arbitrary reasons, just to arbitrarily force me to get this dangerous medical procedure that I didn't need.
So we know how the university administration has responded to this, but have you gotten any feedback from your students or from your colleagues, your fellow professors about your vaccination status and about your fight against the mandate?
I have, and I'm fortunate, Angela, because Antonin Scalia Law School is a unique gem of a law school. I don't know if you know much about the law school, but we are a clear thinking law school where people look at evidence, they look at science, and I have not gotten any gruff at all from any of my colleagues, except for those who are jealous that I have natural immunity already and they don't. one of my colleagues said, "Where do I go to get a refund on my vaccine?" Right. So the science isn't hard here. The data isn't hard, and it's not like there's any debate about it. So if you've got colleagues like mine who are serious thinkers, as they should be as lawyers, I haven't had any problems. I haven't had any problems with from students. In fact, I've got students who've reached out to me. I've got potential students from all over the country who are reaching out to me, telling me that they're coming to apply to the law school because of what I did, right? And what it says about the law school, right? So I can't speak the same for, all the more muddle-headed people over on main campus and some of those departments that I don't interact with. But in the law school, people have recognized the validity of what I'm saying. They have recognized the importance to me and the moral authority and my sincerity in doing this. And so I've not really had any problems. But a lot of that has to do with just how what a uniquely inspiring and honest place I teach at, and the integrity and intellectual strength of my colleagues. I couldn't say that there'd be very many other law schools or universities around the country where I could say that.
And hearing about future potential students who want to apply because they've been inspired by your legal fight tells us that this has created some ripple effects within the higher ed world. And I understand this is not the first time you have caused some disruption in the world of higher ed. I recall that you've been a trustee at Dartmouth University off of a write-in campaign. And look, I've had the pleasure of speaking with quite a few trustees. I've never known one to be the product of a write-in campaign. What prompted that?
I guess if you ask the different people, then they give different answers. Most of them dealing with the fact that I must be mentally unstable, but to pick so many fights. But I'm joking. But 15 years ago, I was disenchanted by the way that Dartmouth College is being run. They had a speech code. They were, I felt, spending too much money on administration, and they had a poor vision for the college. And so I ran and got elected as a writing candidate of the board of trustees. And one of the things that came out of that, Angela, is I'm the only. I'll toot my own horn, I guess, here a little bit. I'm the only person I know who is responsible for getting speech codes repealed at two different universities, both at Dartmouth when I was on the board. And then I came back home to George Mason, or to my main university, and I said, we got a speech code here too, and we need to do something about it. So that started about a 5-year process of trying to persuade George Mason to get rid of its speech code, which finally culminated in making that happen with enough noise and pressure and help from some members of the board of visitors. So we have a green light rating here at George Mason as well. And I guess, I guess there's just certain things that I can't sleep with myself if certain things can't be done. And in this case, I felt like this was important not only to me, but important for the principal when it comes to this vaccine mandate, which is I have a voice. It's astounding how many tenured professors are simply cowards. And my view is I've got tenure, right? I might as well use it, right? Isn't that what tenure is for? Which is to stand up for justice, and to stand up for people who don't have a voice. And so, what I was hoping to do with this was help all those students and employees at the university who might not have as much power and as much voice as I have. And I've done a lot of media. I've been on Twitter talking about a lot of these issues, and so I just felt like this is something I needed to do in order to sleep at night. And fortunately, as I said, my colleagues have supported me, my family has supported me, and I was at the Federal Society convention a couple weeks ago, and I have to say I didn't have to buy myself my own drink the whole time I was there. So there's a lot of people who may not have public appreciation for all these sorts of things, but there are people who will give you a pat on the back if you're willing to charge up the hill. So.
Well, hard to argue with the free drink polling. I would say that
That's
may
right.
be a very different barometer of public opinion.
That's right. That's right.
I also want to talk about your book. You're the co-editor of a book called Unprofitable Education. And in it, you talk about what it might look like if higher ed was a truly free market. And what we have now is so different from that. I think it can be hard for people to conceive of what a free market higher ed system would look like. So if you could just sort of hit the high points for us, what are the biggest changes we would notice if that happened overnight?
Yeah, so this is a book I published a few years ago through the Cato Institute called Unprofitable Education, and it looks at the current state of the higher education system through the lens of sort of governance and in institutions and markets, right? So, so why is it that everybody knows something's wrong with higher education, yet it continues to get worse instead of better? And a lot of it has to do with this. And so, one of the observations the book starts with is that in a capitalist system, there is what always happens in a competitive market is quality increases and cost decreases. And what we've seen in higher education is that quality decreases and cost increases, right? And so why is that? The thesis is that because we don't really have competition in higher education, we've basically turned higher education into the healthcare system. And how have we done that? Basically because of the government. The third party payer and the amount of money that the government infuses into higher education brings with it this web of regulation, accreditation, and everything else that prevents entry, that prevents competition. And so, basically what we argue for is how do we try to create more competition? How to create more choice? How do we, in the higher education system, that would do for it what does happen in other areas of the economy? And so, for example, the attack on for-profit education is a good example of the current cartel basically stamping out competition from people who are more nimble and better doing certain things than the incumbent university system. The whole apparatus, the growth of university bureaucracies, which have grown completely out of control, is really hard to explain without the fact that you've got so much government support for all this sort of stuff, and basically building these empires in the administrative offices and that sort of thing, even as money's not going into the classroom, the same amount of money is going to the classroom. So it is hard to envision it at this point, but it basically requires thinking about what would happen if we pulled back all the accreditation, the regulation, all the things that basically stifle innovation, entrepreneurship, and different ways of doing things in higher education.
Yeah, entrepreneurship and higher ed are not phrases that you hear together very often, but
They
it's
are
certainly
not.
exciting to think of it that way. Professor Todd Zywicki, thank you for answering 5 big questions.
Thank you, Angela.